Hey, well, what's up, Colliders? Daniel here. Welcome to The Collision. I'm excited to talk about probably my most anticipated film of the year. I know for some of you, it's probably your most anticipated film, Dune, the long-awaited, much-delayed adaptation of the classic sci-fi novel by the visionary director Denis Villeneuve, is finally out in theaters and on HBO Max. Just don't tell Villeneuve that. And I've seen it. You've seen it, so let's talk about it. So Dune has been, by Frank Herbert, classic sci-fi novel. It's a complicated, it's an influential novel, but also it's a complicated one. It's very dense, layered, very nuanced. Not just sort of a clear-cut, easy story to adapt to film, which is why it hasn't successfully been adapted to film. There's been attempts, kind of some bizarre attempts back in the 80s, and at various points, directors have talked about it. Villeneuve really is probably the perfect choice to take this complicated story and translate it to the big screen with a giant boatload of movie studio money and budget. So I was curious to see how it would come out. I'm not someone that grew up with the Dune novel, when it first came out and read it countless times. I've read it. I really enjoyed it. Several years ago I finally got into it. So I was excited to see, and I think in the end, kind of much like the shifting sands of Arrakis, the success or failure of how the adaptation went is difficult to kind of to grasp. This film is by no means a failure. I very much enjoyed it. I don't know if it's necessarily just a masterpiece of cinema. It probably falls somewhere in the middle. And a lot of the things that maybe hold the story back or hold the movie back is this because it is tied to the source material, and some of the things that work in the book don't necessarily work in a movie version of it. But I think part of the reason this is a difficult movie to kind of grasp and maybe a difficult movie to even review and talk about is that it is very much a part of a larger story. Zendaya's character, who really doesn't show up until the end, outside of some sort of Dove shampoo commercial scenes, some visions. She's obviously, if you know the book, she plays a large role later in the story, but kind of at the very end of the movie, she kind of breaks the fourth wall and looks at the screen and says, this is just the beginning. And that's kind of what it feels like. That this is sort of this is part one. They haven't really marketed that in the title. Obviously, if you've been following the news and know that a sequel is coming, or they want a sequel to be coming, that this is part one, but this isn't really like part one as though it's like a self-contained story as part of a larger thing. The movie really feels more like this is a 5-hour movie and they got to stop it somewhere, so they just sort of cut it in half, and you're going to see the first half of the movie now, and then maybe in a couple of years you'll see the second half. And the place they do stop it is a logical stopping point. If you know the book and how it ends, it's very kind of thematically, it's a good spot to kind of a pivotal moment to stop. I'm just not sure if it works on like a cinematic level. It sort of ends a bit on a kind of unsatisfying ending that you're kind of waiting for things to really happen. Some stuff happened earlier in the film, and then it just sort of stops because they, at 2 hours and 36 minutes, they kind of ran out of time and they gotta wait. So I think a lot of the like the character arcs and the growth and even the thematic stuff, it's hard to kind of put a finger on it because you have an incomplete story. It doesn't have a clear kind of narrative arc in that way. There's not real natural character progressions. You just sort of get the first teaser of a larger story. But what we do get has a ton of stuff going for it. This film looks incredible. And you expect that with the people involved making it, Villeneuve, Deacon, all those guys. You expect this film to look awesome, and it does look awesome. They have brought it to life. This kind of otherworldly sand planet. Again, it's sort of like the experience I got reading the book, where you just want to go take a shower after, because everything's dirty, everything's lived in. Even the design of the spaceships and stuff. It's all stuff, this doesn't look like Star Wars. It doesn't look like really anything kind of sci-fi that you're familiar with. Everything looks kind of unique. This is sort of vision, and this is the scope of it. The and that's true on like a storytelling level, but just sort of on like a visual level, everything feels huge, including the famous sandworms, which look great. It's just everything is just big, and it's, even though the movie is like the book, it's not a fast-paced story by any means. It takes quite a while to get going. And by the end, maybe the third part act started to drag, but for the most part, because every shot in this, kind of every frame is interesting, and there's always something cool to look at. So even though the story was quite slow, I didn't get bored by it, because it was always interesting. You can definitely see why Villeneuve has been so on the warpath for the traditional theater experience, because a film like this seems like it is made to be seen on a big screen and just immerse yourself in the spectacle of it. And maybe part of one of the flip sides to that is that some of the spectacle kind of cloaks maybe some deficiencies in the storytelling. And that's not to say anything about the actors. All the actors in this, including Oscar Isaac, rocking an A-plus superb beard, they're all good. For me, the standout, Rebecca Ferguson's character, Lady Jessica, kind of playing this very kind of mysterious and complicated character from the story. For me, she's the standout in this. She does bring the emotion, some of that kind of nuanced layers. But again, I think everyone in the story is doing well. But I think because it's sort of an incomplete story, and because there is so much emphasis just on the visuals and the spectacle of it, that even though it is a long movie, I never really felt like I got kind of inside the heads of the characters and really understood the struggles and the stuff that they were dealing with. Obviously, in a book, you can put the reader right into the minds and have their thoughts. In a movie, it's more difficult to do, and I did felt lacking in some of that. I was cheering on the good guys, House Atreides, obviously, Paul and all those guys they're the team we're supposed to be cheering for. So I was cheering them on against the bad guys. But you never really get a sense of like an individual level of why you should cheer for these characters, what they're going through. So I think the storytelling aspect, it's in some ways this Villeneuve is kind of given a masterful visual spectacle, but a largely kind of hollow story. As far as this content to consider, really there's not a whole lot. There's some kind of minor profanities, but not a whole lot in that regard. Sexuality, there's none. There's no nudity or sexual scenes or anything in that way. And then violence, there's action, there's violence, but you don't get, there's not blood or gore. So I think the movie is PG-13, but really just as far as this like surface level content, really nothing to be concerned about. As far as the thematic kind of elements in this movie, again, it's hard because it is only part of a full story, and I know the full story, having read the book, but I don't want to get into spoiler territory for those of you who are only familiar with this kind of part one in the movie. But I think there's a couple interesting things, especially coming at this movie as a Christian, just some interesting kind of stuff to wrestle with that kind of gets you thinking. And one is this the role of a Messiah, kind of this flawed, reluctant Messiah of Paul. I'm not sure the movie necessarily pulls all of that out in this first one as much as it kind of did in the book, or makes it as central. But it's sort of this interesting case study of this. Paul is increasingly kind of pulled between this destiny, this superpowers that he's literally being bred to be, kind of all these outside forces that have sort of set his path before him, and this sort of almost this inevitable destiny that he's going to be going on. Well, he's also just a young kid that wants to, doesn't feel like practicing sword fighting, just wants to, hang out with his friend, and so you do get this kind of tension of sort of two natures, just sort of not necessarily wanting to follow this path of destiny and make the sacrifices and kind of see the consequences that come from that action, but also feeling like he sort of has to, that's sort of what the path that's been laid before him. And obviously, he's not a Christ figure in a traditional sense, of sort of that narrative motif. And again, he's not really in any way analogous to Jesus in the Bible. But you do get some kind of an interesting perspective on that dual nature. I know I was just even just thinking of like Jesus praying, drops of blood in Gethsemane, Father, if, take this cup from me. And it's an interesting, it's a kind of a complicated, messy, it's hard to just pull out a very clear application or from that theme, but it definitely is sort of a foundation, and obviously it's going to be unpacked more in part two, but of just sort of that dual nature of sort of this Messiah that is also sort of, a man and some of those limitations, which I just thought as a Christian was interesting to kind of grapple with. Maybe the second theme that kind of comes somewhat related to that is just sort of flawed humanity. The film doesn't kind of make it as clear as the book as far as like the role of technology and computers in that world, the fictional world, because this is a world that has sort of outlawed all computers. It's outlawed kind of artificial intelligence. Like many classic sci-fi novels have sort of looked into the future and said this will be our downfall. The characters in this fictional world did the same. Said, hey, computers, technology, that's not our salvation. That will bring down our society. And kind of instead of that, they've put all their inventiveness and work into kind of supercharging humans. You get sort of these humans that are almost like walking calculators. Obviously you get some of these sort of supernatural abilities and clairvoyance and stuff that come from some of these characters that have been kind of fostered over the years. And because of that, because it's sort of these characters are putting their we are humanity is our salvation, not just technology. The film kind of shows that actually, you can't transcend human nature. That, even if you outlaw all the technology, all the circumstances that I know in our culture we like to blame for our downfall, humanity is still going to be humanity, and it's still going to be driven by kind of emotions. It's still going to be driven by selfishness and deceit and just sort of this grasp for power. And you kind of see that with these characters in this world, that all the same issues are still present, even if we're kind of supercharged, and you can't really transcend our own nature. And I think you get that a bit with Paul's character, but again, Lady Jessica, Rebecca Ferguson's, particularly, you sort of get that tension of, on one hand, she's this Bene Gesserit, kind of this witch lady that is supposed to kind of control all her emotions and be beyond that, but she's also a mother, and she also feels, great anxiety towards trying to protect her son, and she's emotional, and it's just sort of these roles and tension that you can't just sort of strip the humanity away and become kind of something more than that. And that kind of at our nature we are flawed. And I think kind of on the flip side of that, you also see that this sort of this grasping for godhood, that's not the answer either. That we are flawed humanity, but kind of like Adam and Eve, and taking the fruit from the tree and trying to grasp godhood and be just like God. You kind of see that this impending kind of gloom that kind of circles around Paul's character and his future as he becomes kind of less and less tied to his humanity and more able to see visions and have all these powers. You kind of see that is a looming threat of violence, and that is not necessarily the answer either. So again, I thought this is an interesting exploration that obviously will be carried on more in the next film. So in the end, I enjoyed this movie a lot. I don't know if maybe it seems like I didn't enjoy it as much as I did. It's refreshing to get a film that doesn't necessarily dumb it down and just sort of give you a bunch of action. It does do that a little bit. Some of the kind of more political aspects and maneuvering and stuff isn't brought out as much, and kind of you do feel like Villeneuve added some action scenes, some kind of, we got Aquaman over there sword fighting a bunch of people. You kind of feel like he almost had to put that in just to please the studios and audiences, when he'd probably rather just sort of get into more of the like maneuvering and the political games and some of that stuff. But it is refreshing. This isn't a traditional blockbuster. This is a more kind of serious, slow, dealing with some, there isn't this sort of this clear hero's journey path by the characters, these, very good, noble characters. It's complicated, it's layered, just like the novel was. So again, I'm glad we have a movie like this, and perhaps when we get the second one, if we get the second one, hopefully we do, we'll be able to kind of look back on the first one and take them together and kind of have a more clear sense of kind of whether or not Villeneuve did justice to this great story. But from what we have now, I'm glad we have it, even if it didn't necessarily maybe land quite as high as I had hoped going in. But I'm curious if you guys, whether you've read the book or not, Whether you were super excited for this or just thought you'd see it because everyone keeps talking about it. Be curious to hear what you guys think. Love to have a conversation. If you guys noticed any kind of changes from the books, or just things that you enjoyed, or things that you didn't buy into that Villeneuve did, would love to have those conversations with you. If you haven't done so, I'd also love for you to subscribe to our channel, become a Collider, keep up with what we're doing, join us for our live streams, check out our other reviews, all that fun stuff. So make sure you guys like this video as well. But most of all, guys, stay safe and continue to collide with the world for Christ.